What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going, so he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a ducking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. If anyone is staying in someone's attic right now waiting for them to leave, they are ducked because no one is leaving their house often anymore. Now I'm just thinking of someone waking up to the stench of death in their home and finding someone who starved to death in their attic or walls since they couldn't come out for food. Broig, what happens? I would break out of the attic and run right past someone sitting on their couch before I sat up there and starved to death lol. I would just straight up come down and be like, so, here's the sitch, and hope they were very welcoming, understanding people. Squatter's head pops out of attic ceiling hatchy. Do you, out a second? I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friend told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he had never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. I guess he didn't kill the guys cause one of them was his nephew. Or because people knew they were there. This is probably the only reason they are still alive. Classic nepotism. For real, nepotism runs rampant in the serial killer community. It really needs to stop. Ed Kemper's mom would like a world with you. One day as a kid I was exploring the forest near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars. Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl, in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. Edit, English is hard sometimes. You just got saved from being haunted by a memory for your whole ducking life. So grateful for that. The bag even looked like it hasn't been there that long, still looked new. That's why we wanted to get it. We thought that maybe someone accidentally dropped it in there. To think that the person that dumped it there could have been still nearby. Liv W. 3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 a.m. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them, and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. Holy shit. What was the aftermath? What happened to them? When I worked in healthcare I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. This happened to a colleague, except he lay for 4 days semi-conscious on the floor of his house until another colleague went to look for him. He very nearly died. That is terrifying. Good on your other colleague for going to check on him. Man, now I have a new fear. The Reina Marroquin story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss's wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally, one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it, he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. Seen that Forensics File episode a time or two. Other details: is he was the owner of some sort of textile factory and she was a worker there. Dude got the metal drum from work, put the body in it, filled and sealed it, and didn't realize how heavy it would be and ended up storing it under a crawl space on his deck porch. Home passed through another owner or two before the barrel was discovered. Reckless, just decided to sell the house and leave the body there. From my memory of the house, it was something like hidden under the front deck porch and like a rather large crawl space that's not something you'd expect to be used or intended to be used as storage space by looking at it. AKA it's something they found because they were doing remodeling or construction on the house. After he sealed it up, there probably wasn't a good way to get back in there to remove it without creating suspicion. I'm glad the guy ducked up and got caught, but his only mistake really was selling the house before he died. Hey. I won't critique his murder strategy and body disposal. But I will argue that his biggest mistake was committing murder in the first place. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke, and while breaking down in tears said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason, and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. I recently saw an accident where the man was getting chest compressions in the middle of the highway. I really regret looking. I just keep picturing how much his chest was depressing, knowing his ribs were breaking. I was driving home from work one afternoon and came across an accident. I was one of the first people there. I got out of my car and ran over, broken glass everywhere, and there was a limp body hanging out of the driver's side window and a puddle of blood collecting under his head. I called the police, but they were just pulling up as I did. They asked me to leave, but I never found out if the driver made it. A bit of a traumatizing experience. One time my mom came across an accident on her way home from work. 2 semis had crashed into each other, completely squashed together. It just looked like a normal accident and both drivers seemed fine as the police and ambulance had arrived. She didn't think too much of it, until she turned on the news that night. There had been a car between them, and the driver was one of my brother's teachers. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to Northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you." None of us slept that night. Maybe he was just warning you against picking up random hitchhikers. Probably,